is Laura. I'm Water Ranger's Community Research Coordinator, and today I want to talk to you a little bit more about what Water Rangers does, how we started, and also walk you through how to use our flagship test kit, the Freshwater Explorer Testkit. Water Rangers is a Canadian not-for-profit organization, and we're mostly based in Ontario, although we have people working elsewhere, like me, in Montreal. Water Rangers was founded in 2015 by Kat Kavanagh, our executive director. It was her experience and that of her father that inspired her to start Water Rangers. See, her dad lived on the shores of Lake McLaughlin, which is just on the Quebec side of Ottawa, and he was part of a lake association. So he would go every summer and test the lake. He would take some water samples that would then be sent to a lab that would analyze them. The lab would send the results back to the Lake Association, and at the end of the summer, the Lake Association would make this nice report that it would send out to all of its members that had the information about the results of each of these water quality tests. There were a couple of issues with how this was run. The first was that, unfortunately, since it took so long for members to get the results, if there was anything wrong with the health of the lake, they wouldn't find out until much later, meaning at the end of the summer, so they couldn't really do anything to help the lake. Not only that, but the results were explained in very scientific terms, which made it really hard for Kat's dad to understand if the lake was healthy in the first place. And it also made it harder for him to tell others about what the results meant, because there were quite a few people asking him why he tested the water, what the results he got meant, and if the water was healthy. So Kat thought, well, there must be a better way to share this information right away with people in a language that's easy for everyone to understand. It was all of this that inspired Kat to create Water Rangers. At first, Water Rangers was only an online platform where everyone could share water data with each other. Everything was explained in really plain language, which makes it easy to understand if a water body is healthy or if it needs our help. After a while, people started reaching out to Kat and they said, this is great, but what if I want to do the test myself? What if I don't want to have to take a sample, send it to the lab, wait a week for the results? What if I want results right away and I don't want to have to pay a lab all the time to do these tests for me? What can I do? Well, it's all of these questions and that need that led Kat to create the different test kits that we now have. We wanted to create tools that were affordable, easy to use, and that let people know right away if a water body was healthy or if it needed some help. Making these tools easy to use and affordable was a priority because we truly believe that community-based water monitoring is the way to go to collect all of the data that we need to make sure that water bodies across Canada and even across the world are healthy. This means that anyone can get involved to help protect our waterways. So I'm going to walk you through our biggest and most complete test kit, our Freshwater Explorer Testkit. The first thing you'll want to do when you get it is open the front pocket. You'll find lots of goodies in there. The most important is your field guide. It'll have all of the information you need about the different tests in your kit, how to use them, what the results mean, and also there will be a link to our website where you'll find additional information and videos that will really show you how to use everything step by step. You'll also find this goodie bag. In there, you'll find some postcards. We include these in every test kit because you'll soon notice once you go out to test the water that people will come to you and ask, what are you doing? Why is it important? Where can I see your results? And what do they mean? So you can give them one of these postcards that explains a little bit more the importance of monitoring water bodies and also where they can find a bit more information about Water Rangers and the data you're collecting. You'll also find in your little goodie bag some stickers, some badges, some information about the different elements in your test kit from the manufacturers, and this little envelope with our return address on it. You can use it to return your test strips to us that are used at the end of the season, and we'll recycle them for you. I'll show you in a bit what I mean. We always encourage people to use our app to record their data when they're out in the field. But we want to make sure that your cell phone doesn't get damaged. That's why we include in every test kit a waterproof cell phone case. We recommend that you test it before using it by putting a Kleenex inside, closing it up, and submerging it in water. Even though this will help protect your phone, definitely be careful not to drop it in the water. If you don't have a phone or you decide not to bring it with you, then you'll also see a notepad in here with a pen, with this awesome waterproof paper where you'll be able to collect all of the information you need. You can keep it in here, and then when you get home, you can either use your phone or our online platform to upload all of your data to be able to share it with everyone. In every kit, we also include some gloves and Whirlpack bags. This will help you if you ever go to a water body and you find that there's a lot of pollution and you want to take a sample to be able to send to the lab after. Make sure to wear your gloves and mark the Whirlpack bag with the dates and the time when you took the sample. There's a lot more information on how to do this on our website and in your guide, so make sure to check that out. Let's get started. Let's open up our test kit. So right at the top, you'll see your sample cup. This is what's going to allow you to take a water sample, and with that water, you'll be able to do all of your tests. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to reach the water. That's why we include what we call a reacher stick. It's really a selfie stick, but we've repurposed it. So you would just pull it out, open your little cup, attach it to the top, and there you go. You have a nice little handle to be able to take your sample. Before taking your sample, make sure that you rinse your cup 3 times. This will ensure that it's really clean and there's no residue from the last test that you've done. Also, you should always take your sample at 10 centimeters below the surface of the water. Unfortunately, I couldn't be by the water to film this video for you, so I've gone and taken a sample from the Lachine Canal, which is close to where I live in Montreal, and I'll be using this to tell you about the different tests. Before you take your water sample, look around you. What's the weather like? What was the weather like in the last 24 hours? All of these things can affect your water test, so it's really important to note them down. You want to make sure that you know what the temperature is right now when you're testing. That's why we include a thermometer. We recommend that you hang this in a tree in the shade before you start any of your tests. So you can leave it in the tree, and then at the end of the test, come back and take your reading. If you want to take your reading right away, then make sure that you wait 5 minutes before you take it. If you're on a boat, then make sure you put it in a shaded spot. You don't want to put it up against your neck or on your body because your body temperature will change the results. I have a tree behind me, so I'm going to go hang it in there. I'll be honest with you, I often forget my thermometer in the tree and then I have to go back and get it. So make sure that doesn't happen to you when you're testing. Let's get started with our water test. So you would use your reacher stick and your sample cup to take your sample of water. After rinsing your cup 3 times, you take your actual water sample and you'd want to just fill up your cup until about the line that you have here. You don't need more water than that to do any of your tests. This is plenty. The first test we're going to do is conductivity. You want to take out your conductivity meter. You want to pull the cap off and press the first button. You'll want to wait for the values to stabilize. While we do that, you might be wondering, what is conductivity? Well, it's a measure of the water's ability to conduct electricity, and we measure it in something called microsiemens per centimeter. You can see that little unit at the top, the little US, it's actually micro S for microsiemens. So my values have stabilized, which means that I can put it in the water. I put my conductivity meter in the water, and I'm going to want to wait until the little microsiemens symbol at the top stabilizes, like right now, which means that it's done taking the reading. So it's stabilized at 308 and with a temperature of 19.8 degrees Celsius. So I would write that down in my app or in my notebook. So you might wonder, what affects conductivity? Well, there's different things that will affect conductivity. Overall, it's a measure of the different ions and dissolved salts in the water. So that means that the rock bed of water bodies is going to really impact the conductivity. Also, as I mentioned, weather is really going to impact tests, and one of these is conductivity. Because picture there being a really big storm right next to where you're testing. Well, all of that rain and that wind would bring in a bunch of sediment into the water, and that would increase different salts and rocks and dissolved ions in the water, which could create a spike in conductivity. So you might be measuring and then all of a sudden see that there's a big spike in conductivity and think, uh-oh, there's something wrong with this water body. But if you look at the weather for the past 48 hours, you'll see that it was just a fluke caused by a storm. That's why it's really important to understand the weather in the past 24 to 48 hours before you test, because it can explain a lot of discrepancies in your tests. So I'm done with my test. I'm going to take out my conductivity meter, make sure to really clean the electrodes, dry them, and when I get home, I'm going to run them underwater, or even better, clean them with distilled water to make sure that my conductivity meter lasts a long time. To turn it off, I just press the first button, I put my cap back on, and that's it for conductivity. The next test we'll do will involve these test strips. Yes, they are pool test strips. We did extensive research with these, and we actually found that these were the most accurate. If you want to learn more about the different test strips we tested and how well they perform, then visit our research page on our website. So these will test for 4 different elements. The first will be chlorine. Normally, in a natural ecosystem, you shouldn't find any chlorine in the water. That being said, humans do add chlorine to water we drink and to different chemical processes. So sometimes water contaminated with chlorine ends up in natural ecosystems. For example, a good friend of mine that tests in Toronto often finds level of chlorine similar to a pool in the little stream that runs behind his place. That's probably because some people are emptying out their pool in the little stream close by. The second parameter is going to be pH. So the pH, which stands for hydrogen potential, is a measure of how acid or basic the water is. So it goes from a scale of 0 to 14, with 0 being very acid and 14 being very basic. So something neutral would sit right at the middle at 7. Ideally, fresh water bodies have a pH between 6 and 8, and this really just varies between water bodies. That's why it's important to test your water body regularly to understand what values are normal for that water body, because you want to create a nice baseline of data to be able to notice any sudden changes in water quality. pH varies naturally during the day. That's why it's important to test at the same time every day that you perform your tests. Algae blooms can also really increase the pH. It can reach values up to 10, which would cause most of the fish to die. The next parameter we're measuring is alkalinity. It represents the water body's ability to resist changes in pH. Alkalinity of a water body won't really change. It stays pretty consistent. The last measure is hardness. You might be familiar with this one. Similar to conductivity, it's also a measure of different ions in water bodies. And some of you might be familiar with the concept of hard water. If your water at home comes from a well or from a groundwater source, you might have hard water. That means that it's quite rich in minerals, and you might even have a filter to make the water softer, which means removing some of the minerals. So when water is really hard, it feels a little bit like seawater. It's not always the most comfortable to wash in or to drink, and that's why we filter it. So let's get started with these. Make sure you have really dry hands when you do these, because you don't want to get water in the bottle, which could damage all of the other test strips. So I've just opened my bottle. I'm just going to shake it until a test strip comes out. So you'll see there's 4 little pads that represent the 4 different parameters we're measuring: chlorine, pH, alkalinity, and hardness. I'm going to close my bottle, take that same water sample I had. I will dip my test strip in for 2 seconds. 1, 2. Don't shake it. You can just wipe the excess water gently, and then we'll have to wait 20 seconds to take our measurements. How are we taking these measurements? Well, this is a color-based test. So we always say to measure 1 parameter at a time and always start at the bottom of the scale. So I would put my test strip vertically next to all of the parameters, and I would start looking at just chlorine. So I would slowly move it up and down until I found a color that matches it. I'm just going to turn it to be able to confirm the color that I see. So for chlorine, thankfully, I'm finding a value of 0, which means that there's no chlorine in the water I'm testing, which is quite nice. So for pH, you can see that my pad is quite pink. So I'm moving it up and down, but the lower values are quite orange, which means that I'm going to have a much higher value than the lowest one. So I'm going to be around here. I'll just turn it to look at my value. So I think that I have about a 7.5. So it's important to note for all of these color tests that your answers might be a little bit subjective. So it's always nice to have a friend to compare results with, and if the two of you can't agree on a value, then just take the average of the two values you see. And speaking of, you can always take the average of two different values on this bottle. So for example, if your test strip was between a 6.8 and a 7.2, you could record a value of 7. The next step will be my alkalinity. So same thing, I started on the lower end and I slowly move until I find a color that matches it. I'm going to be around here. Let me look it up. So for this one, I'm going to be between a 120 and a 180, which means that I can take the average of the two and I will write a value of 150. As for my hardness, it's quite low on the scale. I can see right away. I'm close to this lilac. So right between this lilac and the 0, so I will write a value of 50. So once I'm done with this test strip, I've taken all of my measurements. I will put my used test strip in this little container. I have quite a few in there. And at the end of the season, I could use that envelope that I showed you that's located in your front pocket to mail these back to us, and we will recycle them for you. We know that reading these test strips can be hard, and everyone interprets colors differently. So it's good to have a friend with you, but more than that, we're working on a machine learning algorithm that can help read these test strips for us. You might have in your test kit one of these reference cards. So to be able to use one of these, you would just put one of your test strips. I just put mine away. I'll take one out just to show to you. But you would just put your test strip right here, and you would use your phone. Upload it on our phone app. Make sure when you take the photo that you put the test strip on a flat surface and your fingers aren't covering any part of this reference card. This is going to help us train the algorithm so that hopefully it can get really accurate and remove human error from reading these tests. The next test we'll do is the trickiest in your test kit. It is for dissolved oxygen. We don't recommend this test for children under 9 because it involves manipulating glass ampoules. I say it's tricky, but it's not that tricky. You'll see. You just have to be quick and get the hang of it. So, you open up your dissolved oxygen test kit, and you'll see on the top, there's a little color scale that we'll use to read our results. You'll see there's a very small sample cup that we'll need to take our sample for this particular test. You'll also see there's a sand timer, and in here is where you'll find the glass ampoules with the chemical that will allow you to do the test. So dissolved oxygen, as the name says it, is a measure of the amount of oxygen that's dissolved in the water. This dissolved oxygen is really important for aquatic ecosystems, so the different plants, the fish, and other critters that live in the water. Our water body can have really low oxygen levels. If, for example, there's a sewage spill that happens in the water body, the dissolved oxygen levels will plummet really quickly, which can be really dangerous for all of the fish and plants. Not only that, but I mentioned algae blooms before. So if there's a really big algae bloom, that means all of the algae starts growing out of control. That algae can use up all of the oxygen, which means that there would be no more left for the fish, so they would actually suffocate and die. That's why it's really important to measure dissolved oxygen. So why is this test so tricky? Well, not only are we using glass ampoules, which can be a little hard to manipulate, but you also have to do this test really quickly. And that's because as soon as you take your water sample out of the water, it's going to start absorbing oxygen from the air, which means that you can get results that are a little bit off. So as I mentioned, I took my water sample a little while ago. So I'll do this test, but my dissolved oxygen results won't be accurate because my water's been sitting here for a few hours already. So in your little sample cup, you'll notice that there's little ridges at the bottom of the cup. So these will help you to break the tip off the ampoule. Let me show you what I mean. So I take a glass ampoule out, and you can see that there's a little white mark at the tip. That indicates a weak point in the glass. So once I fill this up with water, I will put the tip in one of these little grooves, and my ampoule will sit like this. And to break it off, I'm going to push the ampoule against the side, creating a lever effect, which will break off the tip. So it's not a pushing down motion, it's really a sideways motion. You really don't want to push down because you can break off more of the ampoule than needed, and then that will create sharp edges on the glass. Ideally, you want to do this whole test in 20 seconds or less. If you have easy access to the water, you can directly take a sample with your little cup. But if you don't, then you have to empty out your sample cup, put it on the reacher stick, take a sample with it, and then pour it out really quickly in your little cup before breaking the ampoule in there. I will take a sample from my mason jar, and I will try to do this really quickly for you. So just keep an eye out for everything I'm doing. You don't have to fill up your cup all the way. Got a little splash in there. I put my tip, I break it. So you can see it absorbed the water and it's already starting to change color. So you want to make sure that the water and the chemical in there mix really well. So you want to move your ampoule up and down a couple of times, making sure that the bubble goes up and down at least twice. This ensures proper mixing. So once this is done, you have your 2-minute timer here, and we're just going to set it and wait 2 minutes before we can take our reading. If you have kids with you and they want to get involved with this test, you can definitely give them the little timer to keep track of as a way of getting them involved. I found that they love telling you when time is done and it's time to take the reading. So while we wait our 2 minutes, there's a few things we can do. First, we can empty out the water from our little sample cup. Remember, your glass tip is still at the bottom, so you're going to want to empty this really carefully to make sure that the glass tip stays at the bottom, and I'll show you how to get rid of it after. So I'm going to pour it really slowly, making sure my glass tip stays in there. I can still see it. Another thing we can do while we wait is that we're going to want to take out our chart. So at the top here, you have the chart that you have to use to take your measurements, and you're going to want to just pull from the top to take it out. It's a little hard. I'm just going to do it like this. Big click. Oh, look at that. My timer's done. So similar to the test strips, you're going to want to start right from the bottom and slowly bring your ampoule up next to each color until you find the one that corresponds to it. For this and all of the different color tests, you want to make sure to not be wearing sunglasses because it can affect the results. Especially for this test, we also say that it's nice to move it around in the light. We look a little silly doing that, but light really changes our perception of these tests, so it's important to move it around to get a better sense of the values that we're reading. So just like with the test strips, you can write a value between 2 colors if that's what you see. So I'm actually thinking that my value is right between an 8 and a 10, so I would write down a value of 9. So this would be quite good for a water body, but as I said, since my water sample has been sitting in this cup for a few hours, my values are higher than what they should be. So once we're done with our glass ampoule, you'll find in your test kit a little trash bin like this that you can just open and put your little glass ampoules in there. And your tip that's at the bottom of your little sample cup, you can also just throw in there, shake it until it comes out, and you're done. So once we're done with the vial, we want to pack up our dissolved oxygen test kit. So I will take my little case, and to put this back, you want to put the top in first, and then just push at the bottom to get it in. There you go. I put my sample cup back, and everything else, and that's it. The last test I'm going to show you is one that you may or may not have to do depending on where you're taking your water sample from. If you're taking your water sample from a boat, then you'll definitely want to use this. It's what we call a Secchi Disc. You might have seen those before. This is a pretty standard instrument that's been used for literally hundreds of years to measure water clarity and also sometimes water depth. So how it works is you can see that we have this disc with black and white triangles. And there's also a weight attached at the bottom so that it can easily sink into the water. We use a measuring tape that's going to be able to tell us precisely the water clarity. So by that, we mean at what depth can we no longer see the Secchi disc. So I'm going to put my hand in the little strap here so I can easily hold my disc. So if I was on a boat or on a dock, I could do this test easily. You would just slowly let your Secchi disc sink in, and you would look over Make sure you don't have your sunglasses on for this test as well, and you slowly let the Secchi Disc fall down as straight as possible until you no longer see it. When you reach a level where the Secchi Disc has disappeared completely, you want to pull it up and down a little bit to find that exact spot where it disappears. So let's say my water is right here. I would take my measurement at the surface of the water. So I would have a measurement of clarity of 42 in my case. For water bodies that are really clear, you can get measurements of 5 to 8 meters easily. So this is a really fun test to do if you can. If you see the bottom of the water body, then you can definitely use your Secchi Disc to measure the water depth. Just remember that these go up to 20 meters, so it's not good for measuring really deep water bodies. Once you're done, you can dry your measuring tape or leave it in the boat to dry in the sun. You can wipe it down once you get home to make sure that it stays really clean. You can easily reel it back in and pack it up in your test kit. We're done all of the water quality tests in our test kit, and I haven't forgotten this time that I need to go get my thermometer in my tree, so I'm gonna go do that right now. I tried not to touch it so my body doesn't warm it up, and I can read my temperature. It's a little hard to see, but you'll have to trust me on this one that I have a temperature of 21 in here right now, so I would note that down as well. That's it for all the components of your water test kit, but before you go, I just want to give you a few more tips. The first one is to remember that all of these tests are going to give you a good idea of if the water body you're testing is healthy. But to be able to really do that, you have to make sure to test consistently to get an idea of what normal values are in the water body you're testing. That means that you want to be really consistent. We recommend people test at least once a month at the same time every day. Our official national testing day is the last Sunday of every month at 10 a.m. If you can't make it that day, then try to go the Saturday or the Friday before, or even the Monday if you need to. If you're using a different testing protocol, then make sure you write that in your profile on Water Rangers. Testing regularly is going to allow you to get that baseline data that we call, so that if all of a sudden you notice that one of the parameters you're measuring is much higher or much lower than usual, you can try to investigate as to what caused it. It's also really important to write down the weather from the past 24 to 48 hours because it can have a really big impact on the different parameters that we measure. We also encourage you to write notes about where you're going to test. If you notice any changes in vegetation, or if you see any animals in the water or on the shore, you should definitely try to take photos and include those with your observations. It's great for people to see the place where you're going to test, so that if they want to go test at the same spot, they'll easily be able to find it. If you see any problem where you're testing, you can also create an issue on our app. This allows you to take photos, say what the issue is. If it's pollution, a large amount of trash, or anything else, you can put it on there. You can then do a follow-up yourself or contact local organizations that might be better suited to deal with that problem. You can then resolve the issue on the website so that everyone can know the outcome of that issue. You can find more information about this in your field guide. And if you're ever curious about what the values you measure mean, make sure to check out your field guide because it'll have all of the information you need about what are some normal values in healthy water bodies. So the last step is to pack up your test kit, make sure you leave nothing behind. You can then go to your next testing location. I hope you have fun testing the water, and if you ever have any questions, we're here to help you.